Mr. Derek Veenhoff, who's better known as Deek.
Drinking liquor with DJ Deek, we out laughing.
Yo, Deek.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to the Deekast, episode 56. I'm here with Brian Dunning. Welcome, Brian.
Hey, welcome to you too. You're on my screen, I'm on yours.
Yeah, exactly. Brian is a writer based in California. He's a producer, and his focus is on science and skepticism. So he has a podcast that's been going now for 12 or 13 years called Skeptoid. That's a long time.
2006. It sure is a long time.
So why don't you give people a little background of how did you get into this skepticism in general, and sort of a background of what you do and the sort of content that you put out and why?
You know, I think I give the same story that a lot of people give when asked that question. People who are in my business who do science communication, as we were all total nerds growing up. You know, we all watched Star Trek and science fiction. We're all into that stuff. But many of us also, especially as kids, were into UFOs and ghosts and Bigfoots and aliens, reading all of those books, all of the, you know, the Amityville horror for everything else. I certainly was. And again, like many of my peers, I believed every word of it. You know, that's not hard when you're 10 years old. But it just instilled this really deep passion and interest for weird subjects and weird stuff. And then as many of us got older, and this is my story as well, we go into the sciences. I studied computer science, but I also studied writing for film and television. So that's not quite as much of a hard science. But it just kind of gels this intersection of weird stories, urban legend, paranormal tales, and hard science. And studying the real science and the true history behind each of these, and they all have things like sociology behind them. So you get into these weird historical trends of what kinds of things are people thinking about in the world and why, and how does that drive and influence some of these urban legends and the growth of them. So there's a lot of these fascinating currents in these related sciences as well as just the hard science. So after working in very boring industries for a long, long time, when podcasting finally became a thing, I said, you know, I've got the entertainment industry background and the computer science background. I go, oh my gosh, this is exactly what I want to do. So I began doing the Skeptoid podcast just as a hobby. At that time in 2006, you had to have I think 5 episodes in your feed before iTunes would list it.
Yeah.
So I made the first 5 episodes and listed it. And now I had the advantage of being early in, so it was a lot easier to be a bigger fish in those days.
Right.
And I got a huge response, and it literally grew from there and has never looked back. It became my full-time job in 2010. In 2012, it became a nonprofit. And since then, I'm still doing the podcast weekly, but we're also producing documentary films and web series, educational material. It's kind of become this many-headed beast, to borrow the term from Chris Hardwick at Nerdist, although not as many-headed as Nerdist is, but it's still fun. It's still fascinating, and I still just love kind of unpacking these fascinating subjects.
Yeah, and you put out these very nice and short episodes that are about 15 to 20 minutes usually.
Less than that, to 12 to 14. Yeah.
Okay. And did you start off like that, or did you find that as you went along? And did you?
So, you know, that's actually an important question. At the beginning when I started, there was the main reason for that is because I had limited time. And I wanted to do them really well, and so they're scripted, unlike most podcasts. So I would spend an entire week fully immersed in a subject doing research and everything and coming up with basically 1,750 words, you know, condensed content. And that was kind of out of necessity because doing more work wouldn't really have been possible on a fast production time frame like that. And it also turned out to be super beneficial because to this day, one of the most common pieces of praise that I hear from listeners is, I love that it's so short. It fits into my daily walk or my commute or whatever it is.
Yep.
They don't have to split it into multiple pieces. And the third reason why it's helpful is that since it's scripted and since it's reasonably short, the transcript makes a great web page.
Yes.
And now that I've done 666 episodes, I've got 666 pages of original content. Yes, I know. We can talk about that in a minute. I've got 666 pages of original dense content that Google loves. So if you Google any of these topics, I'm almost always on the first page.
Right.
That's been hugely helpful and hugely key to the success of, originally the podcast and now the company.
So was there anybody in your life, whether family or friends or peers, as you were, that you specifically maybe influenced you to do this? Like certain people you saw that weren't thinking correctly about certain things, or was it more just a personal, journey thing? Or
I think that when I first started doing it, deciding to do it as a hobby, and figuring I was going to do 5 or 10 episodes and have it out of my system, at that point, really, I just had a number of pet peeves that continually irked me every time I would hear people talk about this stuff. And so the first 5 episodes were really Brian's top 5 pet peeves as of 2006.
Right, makes sense, yeah.
And it wasn't really until after I got that off my chest, and then another probably 30 or 40 episodes after that were much the same way, that I started getting feedback like, hey, we're using these shows in the schools. It grew into something larger than I'd anticipated. And that's when it became clear, hey, you need to start doing this in more of a formal kind of way. Mm-hmm. So, that's when I kind of became a full-time science writer and was applying that to Skeptoid and making it more academic, but also keeping it me. And that means it's not too academic and not too dense. It's
sure. It's a little fun too. You got, you do your little breakaways and different voices and stuff like that. Sometimes, it makes it interesting. So skepticism, in a large sense, is because what you do is scientific skepticism more so, but skepticism also applies to other areas like in philosophy, and it can apply to politics and stuff like that as well, right? Do you focus on one type of skepticism, or do you apply it to all facets?
Yeah, I mean, skepticism is an unfortunate word because it does have a scientific connotation that's fairly different from the way that the word is used in general conversation among most people. And I wish I had called the podcast anything other than Skeptoid. I wish I'd given it a title like The Urban Legend Show or something like that.
Okay.
Because I think having the word skeptic in the title, Skeptoid, I think it's probably hurt it, done more harm than good. Because people hear that, they say, oh, skeptic. Oh, you're the people who think we didn't go to the moon. Or you're the people who think vaccines are killing us. Or who think 9/11 was an inside job. It often has exactly the opposite connotation. Now, in a more scientific usage, the word it basically means that we're applying a certain standard of evidence. We start with a null hypothesis, and then we accept evidence that passes a bar of quality. And if it doesn't, we discard it. So really, scientific skepticism is the process of applying a standard of evidence to these fun urban legends, aliens and ghost stories.
Yeah, and some of the topics you deal with, you mentioned that they don't really have a scientific question around them, like the simulation theory, almost like numerology maybe could be in that category too. There's not really a way to test these things. It's more of or even ghosts and stuff, the paranormal stuff. It's often anecdotal. It's people's personal experiences, and you'll have a tough time convincing someone who's seen a ghost that they haven't seen one, and you just really can't test it. We've never caught them on video. You know, Mick West has gone through all the UFO videos that are out there, and we've determined that they're all, you know, street lights or planes flying in certain directions. Like, um, so have you had any personal strange coincidences or anything that because you're often some of your episodes you surprise yourself, so you'll have you know, surprise the skeptic, and there's certain topics that
Mhm.
you didn't even know something about that will surprise you. Have you ever had anything maybe in your life that you couldn't find a rational explanation for, or you know, like Michael Shermer has a story of his wife
Right.
having a broken radio that started playing this love song at the specific time that she was thinking about her father that was out of the country during their wedding day, something like that. That it had been broken for months, they could not fix it, and it started playing on its own at the exact right time, and it made her feel a certain way. And so a lot of people have these experiences and have no way to explain them. Do you live a perfectly rational skeptic life that has no strange coincidences in it, or
You know,
what? Or,
I've had a number of things that happened to me that I didn't know what they were, or I assumed that they were a real ghost or something for, in some cases, the vast majority of my life, until I finally got around to doing an episode on that and learned stuff myself and said, oh, well, gee, that's exactly what my experience was. Oh my gosh, I had no idea that's a real phenomenon in, you know, neurology or whatever it was.
right.
One of those was, and this is something that greatly informed those early years when I was talking about, when I was reading books and believing everything. One of them was when I was probably 3 or 4, so really too young to remember this, but mostly hearing my mom tell about it. She's a single mom. She's got me and my brother in the house, and she can't wake up one morning because there's this pair of invisible hands pushing back on her shoulders, pushing her back into the bed, and she was having to fight it, and she couldn't move because these hands were so strong holding her down. And after minutes of struggling, she finally was able to get out of the room. And so she never went in that room again. And I heard all about that. And I never even considered any explanation other than there was a malevolent ghost of some kind in that room.
Mhm.
And it wasn't until I was doing an episode on, I believe I was calling it night terrors. So night terrors are a thing. And it didn't even occur to me to connect this to my mom's experience. But then you find out about sleep paralysis
Yep.
and exactly what the symptoms are that people report. And it was boom, 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 all the way down the line, exactly what my mom had reported. So that was one. I mean, I had other cases like that too. Um, One that was not too many years ago, uh, which was very, very exciting because I'd been doing Skeptoid for years, and I'm in this mindset of, oh, everything's got some rational explanation, and so you kind of lose hope that anything interesting is actually going to happen.
Right.
And I'm camping out in Death Valley with some friends, and it's late at night. We look up at the sky, and here is this enormous shape flying overhead, blocking out the stars. Um, this sort of an arrow, lights in an arrow-shaped pattern
Hmm.
going overhead, one horizon to the other, and then half an hour later, it came by a second time. That was friggin' awesome because I was genuinely rocked. My world was rocked. My mind was blown, and that was a great, great feeling. And I wish I could capture it again. Unfortunately, the second time it came around, we realized, oh, that's a group of airplanes doing refueling from China Lake right here.
It's basic stuff. Yeah.
And once you see what it is, it's like, oh yeah, of course, it's obvious. There's this guy and that guy and the guy, and
Yeah.
you can tell exactly what's happening.
Well, there's definitely something that makes us want that feeling. You
Oh, it's
know,
the best thing in the world.
yeah, it's amazing. It really feels like you're stumbling upon something that either no one else has or a few people have, and you've got some sort of hidden information or knowledge that you can then use to, or something like that. It feels like the opposite of boring, like just something that, like, life has some sort of meaning now. There's something here that I'm seeing that I'm meant to see, or something like that. You know, sleep paralysis. I've had that too in my life, and
Wow.
yeah, that's a weird thing, and it's kind of like lucid dreaming in a sense, where at least the qualitative experience of it, where it's very surreal, But when it's over, you kind of know, okay, that was real. Like I did just have a lucid dream where I was, I could feel the railing of the staircase or whatever. I remember feeling it. It's super real. Or the feeling, like you said, of being someone on your chest. In different cultures they call it different things. That's an interesting point about it too. That every culture has a story about it. But there was a documentary that came out about sleep paralysis, I think maybe a couple of years back. I never caught it. Did you, like, what is the research there? I don't know. It's one of those things that seems like, okay, we should have more research on this by now. And maybe it is, it's just not publicized, as much as some other things in pop culture, right? Sometimes there's academic stuff going on that is not really, a documentary hasn't really come out, or a book that catches the public eye, so to speak. But what is that, sleep paralysis? Why do we all feel like there's a demon sitting on us? And it's strange, like.
Yeah, that was the cultural similarities were what I found the most interesting part of that, and really the best evidence that it's not an actual paranormal creature sitting on you or something. Every culture, whatever it is, whoever the main sort of antagonist in that culture's legend, their pop lore, their folklore, whatever it is, that would tend to always be who it was. And I loved the fact that in the United States, it used to be the old hag.
Yeah, I was just going to mention the old hag. Yeah.
Yeah, where the word haggard came from. I'm feeling haggard today because the old hag was sitting on me last night.
Okay.
And then with the popularity of Betty and Barney Hill's original UFO abduction in, I want to say 1967, and I'm sure that's right, plus or minus 2 years. All of a sudden, gray aliens exploded into the pop culture. And then we had no more old hag reports. Suddenly, it's alien abductions. Everyone has gray aliens coming into their room and paralyzing them while they're asleep at night. Right. So it's just whatever is in the cultural mindset is what our brains would fill in.
Sure, yeah, like in Japan, there was a dragon or something like that. So yeah.
It was a little gypsy man in the Slavic cultures. It was a beautiful woman from the Hindu gods. I don't recall in much of India. Yeah, it's fascinating. It's wonderful.
What about numerology? Now, my mother thinks that she sees 333 all the time, and every time there's this meaningful coincidence, it's always 333. And I've had this too in my life. Like in 2011, I think I was kind of into the whole Mayan calendar 2012 thing, and we would see 11:11 on the clock, or 12:21 all the time, and we would always point it out. But I forget the name of that phenomenon. It's a long word. It's a German word or something. That phenomenon where, like, I just bought a Kia Soul, and I've never seen them before I bought them. But once I bought a Kia Soul, I see them everywhere. Yeah.
Or you hear a name, you hear someone's name that I've never heard that name before. That's an interesting name, and all of a sudden you hear it every single day. Yeah, it's the same thing. I know the word you're talking about, but I have no idea what it is.
The Bader-Meinhof phenomenon. That's what it's called, I think.
Okay, that's not what I had in mind, but
I don't. Bader-Meinhof. Yeah. The illusion in which a word, a name, or other thing that has recently come to one's attention suddenly seems to appear with improbable frequency shortly afterwards. So that's just attention, right? That's just attention span and sort of what we're focusing on. I mean, meaningful things happen at every given time of the day, right? It doesn't. A time is just arbitrary. It's just a clock. It's the planets going around each other, right? I mean, is that a bad worldview to have, that nothing means? Is that like the Nietzsche, nothing means anything? Is that the extreme of a skeptic? Like, could there be too much skepticism where it just there's nothing coherent, nothing means anything? The world is just an abyss, and it's futile, and that. Or,
well, I hear that charge being made all the time from anyone who does science writing like I do. We get emails every single day from people who believe this or that, whatever it is, calling us, shills for the establishment or whatever. And I hear that all the time, that, oh, you must have a life devoid of meaning. How how horrible your life must be, how empty and dry and boring every minute of every day.
Right.
And yet I've never heard anyone who expresses feeling that way. I mean, I don't. I mean, I hope you can tell that I have some excitement about solving these mysteries, how much fun that is for me. And I'm excited by the fact that when we do solve these mysteries, we understand what's happening better, and we can then make better decisions on how to deal with them. And that's where we get progress that helps the human race, you know?
Right, and that stuff's actually, the truth is more exciting. It may be harder to find or take longer to get to, but it's reality, and in the end, that's actually what is real. Should be the most exciting thing, not just what we conjure up or what we imagine to be real, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's something that I find in probably 75% of my podcast episodes, when we're dealing with something that a lot of people have, you know, the wrong idea about, and maybe that idea to them is awesome. And for example, I've got a Bigfoot article on my screen right now, and that just suggests an example. And you might think, well, gee, for whom is that a meaningful subject? And you know, what's the other side of that coin? And just using that as an example, there are people who see Bigfoot as some kind of a spiritual interdimensional being. There's a Bigfoot club here in town where I live, and my wife and I went one night just to have a beer with them and listen to what they had to say. And most of them think it's a real animal. There were a couple of people who thought that it's some weird spiritual interdimensional being of some kind. And they were all good with that, and that's fine. And those people love that. And they're the kind of people who would hear my explanation of, well, Bigfoot's probably not real, and think that I'd live a horrible, dry, meaningless existence.
Mm-hmm.
But I can then look at the other side of that coin and say, okay, how do we know that Bigfoot's not real? What does that tell us? What, for example, the people who made the Patterson-Gimlin film, understanding what was in his mind, why he was doing it, what he got out of that. For me, that was a really rich story that gave important insight into people dealing with grief, dealing with personal tragedy, and the lengths that they might go to. I guess you'd have to hear my episode on that to understand what I'm talking about.
But
it's kind of a big subject, but
sure.
There's a lot there.
It speaks to the sociology, like you mentioned too, right? Of just not only why people believe things, why they think the way they do, but why they would purport something that is like a hoax. So like in the speaking of pop culture, the Jussie Smollett thing, the hoaxed hate crime. Like this person went to such a length to create this false scenario that seems so far-fetched. Like in that, you know, I don't know. You wonder why people. Is it just simply just attention, or is there a lot of layers there? You know, there must be some deep psychological layers to it.
Yeah, that's another great example, because now I preface this with I don't know the facts of the case, you know, other than what's in the news, and so that's probably a pretty inaccurate picture in my experience. However, assuming something like that is what happened, that he did hoax this for attention, he thought he was going to lose his job, he wanted to be a larger, more prominent civil rights figure, I don't know, anything like that.
Yeah.
Those are important psychological lessons for us. And when we do get to the truth of what actually happened there, we have better insight into not just him, but in people in general. So I really do think that it's important to actually solve these mysteries and not stop at the popular explanation, whether it's Bigfoot is an interdimensional being or whatever it is. There is actually an important lesson that does help us better deal with the world and come up with better solutions to problems.
Right. Well, let's get to some maybe juicy topics that people like, maybe just debunking a bunch of stuff. So how about this? Chiropractic. Is that total BS? Helps a few people, but not really based in science.
So, yeah, it's a big topic. Yeah. The heart of chiropractic is total BS. However, the big however is that what most chiropractors are actually providing is unlicensed physical therapy. Physical therapy does have therapeutic value. So when you go to your chiropractor and he maybe he cracks your back. He's also doing basically what amounts to a therapeutic deep tissue massage, and you are getting benefit from that. The cracking your back, I mean, that's just the same as cracking your knuckles. It has no therapeutic value at all. And of course, the whole history of chiropractic, this idea that innate intelligence, which is a spiritual fluid akin to the Chinese qi, flows through these meridians in our body, and cracking your knuckles and your back is going to somehow improve the flow of that and cure all disease. That's total BS. But it is the only thing that separates chiropractors from physical therapists, is that chiropractors believe that. If they didn't believe it, they would be DPTs. They would have gone to medical school and become physical therapists, or perhaps even doctors. But, a lot of people believe that a chiropractor is a back doctor. That's right. They call themselves doctor, even though a doctor of chiropractic is not a recognized medical profession. It's essentially a self-certified. It's like if you and I decided to call ourselves doctor of podcasting, and we insist that people call us doctor.
Which we are doctors of podcasting.
We are. We are doctors. You must all call now, both of us.
But yes, you do have to. I mean, I was looking it up in Canada, at least. I mean, you do have to go through like a chiropractic school of some sort, but it's and it does take a long time, actually. I was surprised.
Yeah. Those schools, they're not accredited by well, in the United States, accreditation bodies that grant accreditations to universities, they all have to be approved by the Department of Education. And in the United States, chiropractor schools are not accredited. However, so what they did is they created their own accreditation body. It's like, hey, I'm now the Acme accreditation body, and I'm certified to accredit chiropractic schools. So yes, they are doctors, and they are from accredited medical schools, but it's not an accreditation that satisfies anyone else's criteria.
Yeah, something like minimum, it says here, students in Canada are required to complete a minimum of 3 years of university before they're eligible for admission to the Doctor of Chiropractic degree, and a minimum of 7 years combined prior to graduation and licensure. So, yeah, they make it this long, drawn-out process, and the foundations there are pseudoscientific.
Yeah, and that's common worldwide, unfortunately.
We have a big problem with the whole anti-vaccine movement. People will know that there's a lot of measles cases coming out in the North America. I'm not sure about Europe and that at the moment, but the cases that I've seen at least are here in North America. You also have this, is it in Oregon? There was the first case in 30 years of a 6-year-old boy had tetanus, it cost something like, it was like $800,000 US for the treatment, and the parents still afterwards refused further immunization recommendations by the doctors and this and that. And so, you've mentioned Andrew Wakefield in some of your episodes, and he's a big problem. And we had David Robert Grimes on here one time, who had a public debate with him once in the UK, and he says, I never should have done it because I gave him a bit more of a platform than he deserved. And he's the type of guy that says, just the answers are in my book, buy my book, that kind of thing. And it's we see the dangers of it. How should we think about the anti-vaccine movement, and what can we do sort of as citizens, other than maybe just like, is there a governmental top-down solution to these kind of things, like or how do you have a solution in mind of that kind of changing the thinking on vaccines?
Well, yeah, I do. There's like many problems, a multi-pronged approach is likely to be most successful. And that does include, Oregon right now is voting on a measure to eliminate the conscientious objections. So many states in the United States have a conscientious, so it means anyone who doesn't want to doesn't have to vaccinate their kids, and they can still go to public school. That is a public health outrage, and it should not be legal in any state. So we do need government to do more about not letting unvaccinated kids into the general population. Now, that's a draconian top-down thing.
Yeah.
It's appropriate, but we also need to help people to come around and to reject this unscientific thinking. To do that, you have to realize it's not the parents who are the problem. The parents are good people who love their children, who believe they're doing the right thing for their kid based on what they've learned. There's nothing evil about that. So we can't be mad at the parents. We have to, people like Andrew Wakefield clearly should be arrested and charged with a conspiracy to commit manslaughter on a huge scale. And that's something that should have happened long ago, and I still hope that it happens. So we need to get rid of these deliberately deceptive sources of misinformation like him, because he is deliberately deceptive. He doesn't believe what he says. And then we can work on education of the parents. And I did an episode on this just a few weeks ago about how we can better reach people. Why have the existing education programs teaching parents, hey, vaccines work and here's the data? Why that has failed and what better approach might work better. And I mean, I can summarize that now if you want, but it might take a few minutes. But
Sure, if you'd like, yeah, go ahead.
I basically we go to psychology and we look at the underlying value system of these beliefs. What do the people who reject vaccines have in common? What is the value system that they all share? And can we find an argument within that value system that they're likely to embrace? Because it's already proven that they're going to reject an argument that comes from outside that value system, like, hey, look, here's the data. They don't care about the data. It's not about that. And with vaccine parents, it's about two things, it turns out. One, we call it liberty. This case of they see it as government overreach. You know, it's another symptom of this whole worldwide wave of populism that's sweeping everything. So they see this as government overreach, government reaching into their lives, government telling them what they can do with their kids. So the counter argument to that is, yes, you're right. Government is corrupt and horrible and evil and big pharma and all of that. But if you're vaccinated, then your body becomes naturally able to fight off this disease if you ever get exposed to it, and you will no longer be dependent upon the corrupt medical system to treat it. Your body will be able to fight it off naturally. Right. So that's an example of an argument that they're likely to embrace that's based on their value of liberty. And the other value that they have in common is, we call it purity. And that has to do with a vaccine is an evil foreign chemical with all these horrible things in it, compared to, oh, I can just, give my child herbs or whatever, and they'll naturally boost their immune system. Something that's nonsensical like that to you and I, but if we tell them that's nonsensical, they're not going to embrace it. They're going to reject that argument. So instead, we find an argument based on purity that they will accept, and it's a similar one. We say basically something like a vaccinated child is equipped to naturally fight off this disease in the future. They're not going to have to require any treatment with chemical medicines, or you're not going to need to be a slave to big pharma. Your body's going to be able to fight it off naturally, because that is, of course, exactly what vaccines do. They prepare your body to be naturally resilient. So you find an argument that's based in the things that are important to them.
That makes sense. Just sort of adopt their value system and argue from their point of view rather than sort of what they perceive as the opposing point of view.
Exactly.
Speaking of power structures in the government, the big conspiracy you always hear, and one of the most interesting topics to people for some reason, is this idea of the Illuminati, or just the general sense of a few, the top 1%, this idea that there is a structure of power controls all the money in the world, and therefore they also control sort of what happens in geopolitics and this kind of thing. Is there a line that you can draw in this realm of discussion that sort of shows the true system, but doesn't ascribe sort of an evil to it? Like, isn't some of what the Illuminati believers, what they're getting at, somewhat true, that there are some rich, powerful people, but that's just the world we were sort of born into. That, do what you can to change it if you think that's wrong, or this and that. But to just, it's sort of a moot point. Do you know what I'm sort of getting at? Of course there are rich and powerful people, but do they have magical powers? Can they fly? I mean, probably not. Can they? Is it like a chessboard that they move it's like Risk that they're. I don't think it's that literal. Like, I think, of course, rich, powerful people will try to influence things. That's what they're going to do, right? They need to push their money around and try to make more money, or maybe, philanthropy, like help people. It's not always an evil thing, but anyways, that's a bit of a rant of a question. But basically, in a short form, is there some truth to the Illuminati idea?
I like to ask people who believe that. I like to ask them, okay, so let's say that you were one of these billion-dollar lottery winners, and suddenly you are now the elite, rich, and powerful in the world. What is it that's going to get to you and make you suddenly start to manipulate the lives of all of the rest of us? And they say, well, I would never do that.
Yeah.
Well, where are you getting it that everyone else is doing that? How are you so much superior to everyone else? And why is that? You just got to break it down. And I mean, people are people. A company is made of people. Even an evil cabal, if it actually existed, is made of individual people.
Right.
And people have ethics and moral systems and things that are important to them. And they have parents and kids and family, and they love their dogs, and they run around in the world. How is it that all of these people have been supposedly motivated to turn evil? And why did all the governments of the world decide to hand over their sovereignty to this evil cabal willingly? None of it makes any sense.
Right.
None of it makes any sense.
Now, I don't think you get too political. I think you try to stay sort of centrist in a lot of the way you present information and stuff. But is there a link between this idea of the 1%, of course, the Bernie Sanders angle, the 1%, and, in the U.S. now you have AOC and the sort of left-leaning positions about more rhetoric about corporations and rich people, and a sense that rich people are bad and that corporations are greedy, and greed is bad and money is bad in a sense. Isn't that kind of dangerously? I mean, it's not saying that these people are lizard people, but it's kind of presenting rich and powerful people as bad. And I kind of see rich and powerful people as the almost important people, because they do control and have influence, and a lot of that can be for good. And the fact that society is where it is today is because of a lot of advances in technology and innovation and these different things that drive society, that allow us now to live these great lives with iPads and different things. And of course, we have areas in the world where there's more suffering than us in the first world. But with money and power and influence, we can eventually try to alleviate those things. And I think, isn't that the kind of Steven Pinker view, that things are slowly getting generally better for both money-wise in third world countries and just health-wise? Like, it's not like everything's crashing, but there's this view out there sort of that things are getting very bad, and that money and power is sort of the aim in our crosshairs, so to speak.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a lot of questions, but yeah, I mean, you're right that the data shows that, and it's not just Steven Pinker, it's basically economists worldwide of every political persuasion are fairly agreed upon the fact that in general, the living standard for the world is constantly going up and up. Things
Right.
are indeed getting better and better. That's all the data support that. Common sense supports that. However, as you point out, people always think, oh my gosh, things have never been this bad. But if we go back through history, we find that people have always said that, and they probably always will.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because people they're always pissed off about something, whatever it is. And in many cases, the thing that they're upset about is going to be something that it disproportionately governs their daily life. It governs their attitude, their demeanor throughout the day. Just today, in fact, this I'm still thinking about this. It kind of blew my mind a little bit. I was coming out of a department store, and here's a car backing out of a spot, and this old guy who's walking out of the store goes up to the car who's backing out. He leans into the window and says, "Hey, thank you for your bumper sticker. I really appreciate that. Makes me want to put on a red hat and go out and beat the crap out of everyone." I'm like, whoa, that's a thing. This is an angry old man. He just goes up to the stranger and says, "Hey, I'm so excited. We're on the same page. Let's go out and beat people up."
Yeah.
So yes, this is someone who thinks that there's an enormous problem in the world, and that's not uncommon.
Yeah, it's a perception, right? It's a perception can sometimes take over what your sort of baseline reality view should be, and we have these people that act out in certain ways that based on their perception that they need to be violent or start an uprising or whatever it might be.
Yeah,
which is not good.
A lot of times they talk about the pendulum, the way the pendulum is swinging, and sometimes they say, "Oh, the pendulum is liberal right now, and now it's conservative." And I don't think it goes that way. I think the pendulum goes like this.
Sure.
We're all fairly united and fairly moderate,
Yep.
and now we're at a time like today where you've got the Trumps over here and the AOCs over here, and both positions are equally extreme. And all of my friends who are on either one of those ends will attack me brutally for saying that. Because they're
Yeah.
so convinced that their side is not the extreme side. Their side is perfectly normal and centrist, and it's the other people, whoever they are, that are out of control right now. And if you look
Sure.
at their arguments, they really are the same. Because where the conservative conspiracy theory is that the conservatives will say, "Oh, it's I'm spacing out. George Soros.
Yep.
George Soros is behind everything. He's financing the caravan, whatever it is." And then if you go to the liberals, they're saying exactly the same thing. You just backspace out the name Soros and type in Koch brothers.
Sure.
And it's exactly the same conspiracy theory. So really, we're just in a time right now of extreme polarization on political questions.
Yeah.
We're not one way or the other. We're just extremely polarized. And
No,
I think it'll come back.
It makes sense. I mean, hopefully it'll come back soon. It's just I think it's a manifestation of this concept of duality, where the yin and yang, and it's something about the way that our brains work that it's very easy for us to think of things in black and white. There's our brains definitely can figure out the gray areas and have nuance, but it's something about it's more easy to think in a groove and just backpedal into your corner of things, and just the other side is wrong. And but I think podcasts like yours and others out there change that, right? They make people think more nuanced and sort of meet in the middle if possible.
Boy, I sure try to. I mean, we do know for a fact, because of scientific research, or I shouldn't say fact, I should say the evidence suggests currently that people of every demographic are equally susceptible to conspiracy theories. People on the left should not be saying all those far right people are all conspiracy theorists, and people on the right should not be saying all those people on the far left are all conspiracy theorists, because it's something that cuts equally across all demographics, not just across politics, but across age, across gender, across socioeconomic status, across national origin. There really aren't any groups of people who are more or less susceptible to conspiracy ideation, is the scientific term that we use for tendency toward conspiratorial thought. It's everywhere.
Right.
And the best way to think about that is, hey, if it's everywhere, that means it's in me too, and it's in you too. There are things that you and I believe that someone would consider a crazy conspiracy theory, and vice versa. Now, that's got nothing to do with whether one of us is right or wrong or not, but it's just something that's always important to keep in mind. And whenever I'm writing an article or planning a Skeptoid episode that's obviously going after some type of broken thought pattern like this, I constantly remind myself that I'm guilty of the same thing. And how can I frame this argument in a way that acknowledges that and makes it likely to be embraced by people?
Right. That's a good point. Well, sort of in closing, want to do a little bit of a speed round on a couple interesting topics or things that we can maybe easily debunk.
Okay, let's go.
Okay, we'll see how fast we can go. Should you wash meat that you get from the grocery store in your kitchen? Like you get a chicken, and some people say that's gross if you don't wash it. You should wash it with water to get, instead of just cooking it, to get the bacteria.
Yeah, my speed round answer is I don't know. What seems to me is, I mean, washing is going to get some bacteria off the surface, but if it's got a bacterial infection, it's going to be inside as well. But cooking, you should cook your meat. That's all it takes.
Cook your meat. My speed round rebuttal / answer is, if you wash your meat, you could get spray bacteria all over your kitchen sink, and that could spread.
Well, and as we know, the kitchen is the most bacteria-infested room of the house.
Right.
Far worse than your toilet seat.
Those comparisons you see between Lincoln and Kennedy, and that their secretaries were inverse names, and the 100 years apart, they were elected, and this and that. Just some coincidences, and then a bunch of, I'm not even phrasing this like a question, I'm just answering this now myself, I guess. They're just coincidences, and then some of them are just falsities, right? And then
some of them are just made up, they were just wrong. And a lot of the ones that seem, wow, that's really improbable, there's something there. When you look more into it, you find that it's not at all improbable. Some of them are actually probable. Some of them would apply to
anyone.
Trump and Hillary. I mean, you could come up with any two things. But I mean, I did a Skeptoid podcast episode, and I thought that one was super interesting because all of those little similarities illustrate some different point of a perceptual error that we all make. We see two things that seem to be the same.
Yep.
Why are they the same, or why are they not the same? So I'm going to be like Andrew Wakefield and say, buy my book. So listen to that podcast.
Okay. There's another one with football, 2 football players. I forget the names, forgive me, but someone called into, I think it was the Adam Carolla show recently, and a similar thing to the Lincoln Kennedy thing, but these 2 football players, you know, the one got injured on this date and the other guy got this score and this. So there's different ways to do that and show it in a way that makes people believe that it's some crazy meaningful coincidence. But next, should you install a water filter on your tap? I guess it depends where you live, maybe.
A water filter for what? It depends what you're trying to get out.
Okay.
If you're trying to get out chlorine, you know, yes, you can get out some of the chlorine with a charcoal filter. Or, I mean, depending on the size of the filter, there's filters that go down to just about any size you want. So it depends what you're worried about. Okay. I would say in most cases, there's no realistic need for it unless it's known that your municipal water supply has some contamination, and you would have gotten an alert about that.
Okay. And fluoride in the water is good, right?
Fluoride in the water is, well, fluoride in the water, we can't help it because it's natural. And in some
added fluoride.
Well, added fluoride is fluoride. It's a chemical element. It's the same whether you add it or whether it's natural. Okay. So for maximum health, and tooth decay can lead to infections that can cause deaths. So this is not just about, you know, dental cavities. Yep. I believe it's 0.7 parts per million right now is the ideal level. So in many municipalities, we reduce the natural level of fluoride to 0.7, and in others, we raise it.
Okay, that makes sense, yeah.
Yeah, to moderate it to that ideal level.
Right, and you got it in your toothpaste oftentimes as well, that kind of thing, right?
Yeah, and people often say, well, why don't they do it in Europe? Europe is so much more enlightened than the Americas. Yeah. And the answer to that is, well, because Europe has a medieval water system, basically. Their infrastructure just doesn't support it. So instead of fluoridating water, they fluoridate their salt. Mm-hmm. To get people the same amount.
Right. You did an episode recently on the keto diet and just fad diets in general. And one of your statements you often say on your podcast is that regarding diets is that we're omnivores. And to generally, you know, the best general advice for eating in diets is perhaps just eat a variety of things, you know, not Twinkies, that kind of thing, but like just basic foods that everyone has always kind of had. You talk about ancient peoples and the different specific diets they've had. Certain peoples that have the Inuit that have lived off saturated fats, and others that have lived on grains and that kind of thing. And so the keto diet, what's the short version of the? It's not a miracle, right? Just like these other diets, but it can perhaps help certain people with certain conditions. Is that the?
Yes, if you are epileptic, then there is some evidence. If you're a child and you're epileptic, there is reasonably strong evidence that putting your body into a perpetual state of ketosis will moderate your epileptic seizures to some degree. That's really the only thing that we can say for sure. The rest of it is interesting, and it's not implausible. It's Steve Novella, a friend of mine, called it quasi-plausible. Because when your body is in ketosis, your cells are using a whole different channel for gaining the energy cell. It's burning ketone bodies instead of glucose. And when your brain cells are doing that, we're talking about a different brain chemistry now. So there are a lot of things that are potentially not implausible that the keto diet might address. But you should think of the keto diet as a potential medical treatment for things like that is so far without good evidence, but is being actively researched. You shouldn't think of it as any kind of a miracle way to lose weight, because it's no better of a way to lose weight than any other restrictive diet that ends up with you eating less food.
Sure. And people's reports about better energy, this kind of thing, a lot of that could be placebo as well, right?
Well, we know a lot of that is false because we've tested that, and with elite athletes trying to run on ketone bodies rather than on sugars, rather than on carbohydrates, consistently they perform more poorly. So it's not a way to enhance your athletic performance at all.
So one bigger topic that maybe we could do in a bit shorter form here, just to finish everything off, because I think it is one of the most important topics regarding conspiracy theories, and that is 9/11. I do try to talk about it with every guest I have on that is in the world of skepticism and that kind of thing, because I find to this day that it is still one of the most perpetuated conspiracy theories, and the evidence that these people have for it being an inside job is just getting worse and worse and worse. The memes, the JPEGs are literally getting more blurry as the years go on. Like the more they're getting shared, it's just pixels now. Circles of some stuff coming out the building and saying a little bit of text in the meme, and it's like, this is supposed to give your whole worldview here, this little JPEG shared on Facebook. But what is maybe the largest point that you could say to someone who thinks that 9/11 or disbelieves the official story? What is have you have any experience maybe with converting anybody, or any points that stood out as really powerful?
No, I think that the short answer, no, I haven't.
No, nope.
When you consistently put forth the science of what we know and how we know it, occasionally there are people who will go past the threshold and begin to accept science. But I don't bother to have that debate anymore, because 99.9% of the time it's going to be a waste of breath. For a conspiracy theory that's now that old and would require, the silencing of so many tens of thousands of witnesses, and I mean, it's so past the point of ludicrous that it's not worth it having a conversation. So anyone who still believes that, I have to go fight other battles. I don't bother.
My thing, the reason why I'm still concerned about it is not that I'm an expert, but I'm very interested in geopolitics and sort of how things run and how countries interact, and how, like you said at the beginning of the show here, the real reality and why it's more exciting and why it's more interesting and why it's more impactful than a false reality that we believe. Just some silly thing that the president of the United States was somehow in on, killing his own people just to justify some foreign intervention. Like, I mean, and 2 million, ceiling tiles with bombs in them, and this kind of thing. I feel like it, and I've said this before, and some people have disagreed with me. I think it was Mick West. I said, shouldn't people read more books like Perfect Soldiers by Terry McDermott, or his new one, The Hunt for KSM? These real CIA, FBI stories. You know, it's like the movies. It's cool stuff. You want to read this and see what really went on. Um, and he said no, because there's so many other books that say the opposite. It's not just about giving someone books to read, because there's so many other, and I don't know if I agree with him there or not, because I don't know if you've read that book, Perfect Soldiers, but it's just the outline of how the hijackers went about the whole journey from start to finish, and it's real events. Like, you can't debunk those stories.
Let me give my answer to this question.
Okay.
And this applies to a true believer in anything, because I'll often get an email from someone saying, hey, my mom's dying of cancer and she's relying on reflexology to treat it. Something like that. What do I do? I made a podcast episode. The title was Emergency Handbook, What to Do When a Friend Loves Woo. So whatever it is, whether your friend is into 9/11 or reflexology to treat their cancer, whatever it is, whatever strange belief that it is, my advice is do not ever directly attack their cherished sacred cow. Don't go after that. Don't open with that.
Right.
I'm saying don't open with. That's
Sure.
a bad opening. Instead, find something that you're both going to agree on.
Mm-hmm.
When people ask me what podcast, which of your episodes should I play for this guy who
Yeah.
this, I say, don't play him that one. Play him this one instead. Here's this really cool one on the suicide dogs of Overton Bridge, or the Loch Ness Monster, or the Zuma, the Phantom Satellite. There's a lot of really cool stuff that are gateway drugs to thinking scientifically.
Right.
Because when I'm on a road trip with friends who haven't heard my podcast and I play an episode, they always say, that was really cool, but play another one.
Mm-hmm.
So you can get people interested and want to know more, get them excited about scientific skepticism and skeptical analysis of pop culture. And they will eventually come around on their own. I guarantee that that'll happen, but it's not going to happen in one day by opening with directly challenging their sacred cow.
Sure. Then that's a very good point. I think that's a good point to finish on too, is it makes us, we want to open with the biggest punch because you think that that'll make the biggest impact, right? You want to just shut down their entire view and say, no, that's impossible because of this event. And that's a good
you
point.
Open with that, they're going to cut you off, shut you down, and not listen to anything else you have to say.
That's a really good point. On that note, I want to thank you again for your time, Brian, and we appreciate you coming on the show to shed light on all this stuff. Where can people find your podcast and your website and that kind of thing?
Just come to skeptoid.com. You got everything right there. That's the home base.
Right on. Okay, well, thanks again, and we'll catch you on Skeptoid Podcast. We'll be listening.
All right, man. Thanks a lot. It's been fun.